Right, what's up, creeps, and welcome to the Let's Talk Horror channel with me, BP, on this super special video because this is the first video interview I've ever done on the YouTube channel, and I'm super excited about it because I've got a man here who's, I mean, I'm pointing the wrong way, but he's super handsome. Look at him. Yeah, so I know I get confused like that. But yeah, I've got a man on the show today, and I'm super excited. So if I don't mess this up too much, I might get another one done. You never know.
Okay.
But I've got John Isberg, and John Isberg is what I've got written down because it's a million things: creator, director, writer, producer of Final Summer. Is that everything? Did I get everything all right?
I did. I was a cinematographer, editor. I did a lot of the music for the film,
Everything.
producer, kind of everything. Yeah. I
Absolutely everything.
had a lot of help.
I'm
Like,
a
yeah,
master of his trade. That's what
yeah,
I say
yeah.
already. A master of his trade. But Final Summer is a film that throughout us and the horror community has already built up a lot of hype. Like I mentioned, around the amazing poster that came out about it. We horror fans already know what poster I'm talking about. And it built up loads of hype, and there's so much around it. But give us a brief summary of what Final Summer is.
Sure. Final Summer is a throwback slasher to some of my favorite summer camp slashers of the 1980s. Kind of takes place at the end of camp in August of 1991. And there's this tragedy that happens at the camp. And so in the aftermath of that, a lot of the counselors are just trying to kind of wrap up the camp. And then there's a killer in the woods, kind of thing.
A
And then
rad
it just
looking
goes kind
killer.
of off the rails from that. But no, I wanted the film to feel like a forgotten slasher franchise from the 1980s. I'm a big fan of those films. I kind of grew up as a kid of the 80s. Like I was, like 10 in 1986, and I had older cousins who loved a lot of slasher films, and so I wasn't really allowed to watch them at all, but I would hear about them all the time from them. One of them worked at a video store, and then I think just as a kid of the 80s, you see the imagery, you see the posters. It's very, forbidden. My parents
Yeah.
were really conservative, religious, and so we weren't allowed to watch anything that was, evil or sinful. So of course I was completely drawn to that stuff. And I had a friend across the street, and he would, as we would walk to school, like he would tell me lots of plots to the movies, like Halloween 2. And so I didn't know anything, and half of it made sense, but I was very intrigued by it. And so so that's kind of where a lot of the film came from, I would say. So yeah. And then there was a lot of personal to the film as well, because I didn't necessarily want to make a film about a killer in the woods, but I did want to make a slasher film about being a survivor, and we can get into that in a little bit too. But yeah,
Yeah, well, that is something that really is interesting. Really comes across in this movie as well, because this film is more than just the slasher that you were mentioning, and the films that we got in '80s. As I said at the start as well, I'm going to do my best for everyone as well. Where this film's not officially out yet, hopefully, fingers crossed. But I don't want to give too much away, so I'm going to make myself sort of conscious because I'm one of those people that will always give spoilers by accident. So I'm like, what's his name? And what's it again? Tom Holland.
oh yeah,
Giving
right.
away spoilers every second. So we're going to do everything I can. It won't be John; it'll be me messing it up.
I was
Um,
like,
but you've spoken a little bit about sort of how it all came about.
sure.
For me, it'd be interesting. Was it an idea that you just had for ages that you wanted to do slasher because of those, or was it just a random thought where you were like, the next thing I make, I want it to be a slasher?
Yeah, it kind of went back a couple of years prior because I had I played music in bands in most of my 20s, and then I finally got my stuff together, and I went back and I taught middle school kids with emotional disabilities. But I'd always had film in the back of my mind, and I wanted to do film. And then this film came to town in 2014 called Consumed with Zoe Lister-Jones, who went on to direct the reboot of The Craft and a bunch of other. She's really great. And she was on that film, and the film just blew me away. It was such an amazing experience. And so I was kind of hooked by it, and I wanted to do more. And so I just I bought a Canon T3i. I learned everything I shot like everything. I was completely unskilled in every way, but I just had a lot of motivation and inspiration from that film because I worked I interned in the grip department with a lot of the grip crew from Chicago who work on a lot of indie film and TV shows up there. And so it was just an amazing experience. And, like even further back, I was in like junior high and high school, and I had a friend of mine who had a video camera, like when I was with the, VHS tape
Yeah,
camcorder,
yeah, yeah.
my
Those old school
TVCRs.
ones, yeah.
Oh yeah. And so we would make movies on the weekend. And so I think I always just had the bug for it. And it really wasn't until I walked onto that set that I could really see kind of like how a film is made, how a film is put together, because and that is great because then you can kind of take that language. And I just had so many good mentors, and I had a great mentor in this Key Grip, and then there's this guy Ace Anthony Cabral, who's the first AD, who was an amazing first AD, who just really really motivated me and inspired me. And I was in the Army, and he kind of had a little bit of a similar drill sergeant mentality too,
Yeah.
to run the set. And the set itself felt very familiar from my Army experience. So really, it was just I just
Sort of
started
everything
shooting.
clicked.
Oh yeah, so I just started shooting like tons of music videos. There were a lot of bands in town that were great, and then documentary, and then I'd work on commercials, and then I started this kind of indie film workshop in Champaign, for free. We were only supposed to meet like one night a month, and we ended up meeting like every Wednesday. It was only supposed to be like 2 hours, and every day we'd go from like 5 to like 10 or 11 at night, just kind of practicing our skills. And we'd make short films, and we'd do shot recreations and all sorts of stuff. And it kind of, we started to do bigger and bigger projects, bigger, more ambitious music videos. We finally shot this music video for my friend Jeff, who plays in the Smashing Pumpkins. And it was kind of right at that moment where I'm like, I felt kind of ready. Like I did
Yeah.
like a mini streaming series for like the University of Illinois for their physics department. It was kind of like Stranger Things inspired for like kind of high school girls for, they call it STEM. It's like technology, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, engineering, math, science. But I think that was just like the final leap was like, okay, we should make a feature film. But then it came down to like, what are we going to make? And so I kind of kept going back to like, we should probably find a location that's like one location that we can shoot in, so we're not running all over the place and all this stuff. And then I just kind of looked around at like summer camps. I'm like, well, I do love Friday the 13th a lot. And I love Sleepaway Camp. And so I went to a couple different camps to talk to them. They're like, summer camp slasher, no, take a hike, kind of thing. But I finally found this one not that far, like about 40 minutes from my house. And they said, sure. And I was kind of blown away. And so I went to the camp, and I just walked around in the winter of like 2019 and just looked at the camp and started to see like locations like, oh, that's a cool pool. I like that dining hall. Like that bridge is awesome. Like, ooh, I like these trees, how they're kind of making this corridor, And so it
And you were
was
sort of
really,
building a film around
yeah.
it.
And because I think like that's the biggest thing is like you kind of have to, I realize now that I am way more ambitious than I probably.
Every filmmaker, right?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Every
yeah.
filmmaker.
Yeah, because my friend was like, we should have made the movie of the three actors in a room trying to go to the acting party that night. Instead, we made like a Paramount 1980s like slasher film in the forest with like no money. And so, but it was just it kind of came from that because again, I think you look at you try to make your thing as efficient as possible. So like not only the location to be efficient, but then also the story to be efficient too. So I'm like, well, a lot of horror films take place in one night. And so it's just really starting to understand the structure. So I started watching like 200 slasher films of all levels of quality, and just studied structure. And there's a really great thing called story clock or story circle where you just map out, you just watch your film and you kind of pay attention to the acts and the structures. And I I chose Alien, like Ridley Scott's Alien, as like kind of a model for my
It's
film.
a perfect movie.
Oh yeah, yeah, and like the structure in it is beautiful, and so I just love how all of the kind of beats are built around these questions and answers in a way, and so
Yeah.
it's really. But again, it's like you know, like only when you get there do you realize like just how ambitious it is.
Yeah.
You know, we went through COVID, and so COVID hit, and then like I think the summer of 2020, I was on a film called Revealer that it was like once COVID hit, everything shut down, and then we went and I worked on this film called Revealer that came out on Shutter, I think last year, and
Yeah, and that's one of the other things I'm really
oh
interested and so excited about, because Revealer
yeah,
is it was in my top 5
yeah.
movies of 2022.
Oh yeah, yeah,
It
yeah. That
was
was really
such a
fun.
cool movie.
Yeah, it was really cool. It was really fun because I think just working on the set, like I'd known Luke for a long time because Luke was kind of the director, commercial director at Shatterglass Studios, which is where I interned, and then I started working. I shot a lot of commercials for him, so I worked with Luke a lot for probably a couple of years, and then you know, like I think Revealer was kind of a test for them to see if they could make a film under the new COVID protocol. So a
Right.
lot of the crew from that film, they were kind of out of Chicago, but we were starting to develop a crew. We shot in the back of some warehouse in Champaign, like across the street from. I mean, it was like super tiny, but it was the first time I had probably been out around anybody other than my immediate family for like a couple months during COVID, and so
Strange times.
it was strange, but really great. You know, I feel like we had so many great moments on the set, like Bishop, who's probably one of my favorite actors, and he's in the film. He plays the porn store or the adult bookstore guy with the
Yeah,
Jerry
yeah.
curl. Like he's so great, and it was just
Yeah.
awesome to have. You know, we all had to be like 6 feet apart. We had this big like thing on our. I don't know. It was a great experience. I think to really get back to what film should be about, which is that it's about almost a family. It's like a makeshift family of
Yeah.
oddballs who all love this thing, who all appreciate the same thing, and then are all working really hard to basically make a miracle happen. And so, yeah,
And it's
Revealer was
really nice. It's nice to hear that as well from like a filmmaking journey, because you read so many horror stories about everything that happened
oh
during COVID and lockdown, and what you
yeah
couldn't do and what you could do. And it seems that it ends up being that it was all the bigger films that it was affected and had a harsher time dealing with it, and then the smaller films, but yet they enjoyed the experience so much more because it brought everybody
yeah
together more. Everybody got to work on their craft more so, and
yeah
really, and also do it at sort of the most complicated level, and
right
then that sort of helps you experience it at that level. So then when you go to the next one and there's no COVID protocols, you're like, listen, you're like a
right yeah.
veteran.
Oh yeah, it feels amazing. Yeah, I kind of felt like that too. Like I felt like the people who are working on this film are going to come out tighter with each other on
Yeah,
future films, and it felt like that. And even like that film we shot on a Red Epic using these Atlas anamorphic lenses, which I was like, I want to shoot on those for my film. So I took a lot from that to see how to kind of make my film, and then because our film we were still shooting with like COVID protocols too, and it was just great. There's a shot in the film actually Revealer that I did, which was it's like kind of an homage to Evil Dead in a way. So there's a scene in Revealer where like I think Bishop is already on the ground, and then like the demon kind of flies out of him and comes towards
yeah.
goes to the peep show booth, and that was my shot.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
What's insane is that no word of a lie. When I watched that scene, I was just like, that just reminds me of the Evil Dead.
Oh,
So
sorry. Yeah, yeah,
So there we go. You did it.
yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
it's
No, I love homage because I love like anytime you can throw back to some of your favorite films you grew up on. It's like it's funny because you'll get dinged a lot for that too. But I kind of feel it's like I mean, there's like no, I don't think there's any original ideas anymore. But it's almost
no,
like
no. Well,
just
we were
yeah,
talking about this, funny enough, on the episode I just recorded, and we're talking about the Void.
hmm. Oh, I
And
love that. Yeah, yeah,
that's such an amazing movie. We absolutely loved it. Like literally, we just spent an hour and a half just confessing our love for it. And
yeah,
what we loved about that film, and it's sort of like what you were saying, is that film is struck with inspiration that you can see it from a mile off. And it does pay homage, but it pays it homage perfectly because it doesn't shove it in your face.
yeah.
It
Right,
isn't saying remember this from this movie and remember
right.
this. It's just saying like this is the type of movie it is. if you love Carpenter or Clive Barker or
Mm.
Cronenberg, you're going to
Right.
love this movie.
Oh yeah.
And that's really clever, and that's something that I
Yeah.
really enjoyed
Getting like
with Final.
my hair
Yeah,
standing
that's it. Yeah, that's it. But that's something I really loved about Final Summer as well, which I'll get into
up.
as well. Is
Yeah.
how it didn't feel like you were making a slasher to say remember this, remember that.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that, and like where it felt like an old school slasher
Yeah. I think the interesting
without
thing,
it. Yeah,
yeah, like we can go to the poster a bit too, and then to the look of the film, because I think to me, I like having grown up in the 80s and been a kid, I was like 10, 11, 12, kind of in that, like, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, in that kind of heyday of the slashers. And
yeah,
I just remember, like, so I reached out to to Colm, who's also Creepy Duck, who does amazing posters. And
incredible posters.
oh yeah, and I was just seeing his stuff. I was like, he did a poster for Halloween Ends that I totally loved. It was like Michael's mask, and it had this great like neon
Yeah,
triangle, and I was
yeah,
like,
yeah. I
I
remember
gotta
the
get
one.
this guy for my poster because
This dude
originally,
is amazing.
oh yeah,
I reached out to him when he did a poster for Evil Dead Rise,
oh
and
yeah,
he did
yeah,
this incredible skull one with the city, and I was just like, if they don't make that the official poster of the movie, then
right,
they didn't. They
oh
mugged
yeah,
themselves over. But if they'd have made it, like
right,
because it draws people in,
oh yeah,
like the poster did with Final Summer.
yeah,
As soon as you get, because the thing is, and it's going back to like what you were mentioning earlier as well, and for people like me and a lot of horror fans, especially if you grew up in the 80s and the 90s, the aesthetic of horror and the
mm,
iconography was so important
right,
that when you went into the video rental stores, like
mm,
that's what got me excited. I mean, the second horror film I ever watched was The Evil Dead, and
yeah,
that was because I saw the VHS cover on it
yeah,
and I was just like, what is this? It looks
right,
insane. It looks amazing. I want to watch it. And that was just something that was continuously happening. Like horror art always had the best, and it
right,
always, really made you sort of really interested in what, like you saw that before you saw the film.
right,
And
oh
that's one
yeah,
of the cool things about Final Summer. It sort
I
of
think,
like was like almost nostalgia to me
oh yeah,
because so many of us saw it and then we were like, "What the fuck is this?"
yeah. Well, it's fun. I mean, yeah, I talked with Como a long time, or Creepy Duck, about what is it about these films? Why do we keep going back to them? Because you watch the film sometime and it's like, yeah, it's okay. Like it's not.
Yeah,
And I think what we kind of talked about a lot was the feeling that the imagery makes you, the emotion of the poster, the emotion of the name, what it makes you feel is sometimes even more important than the movie itself. Because like I love all the Friday 13th films, but some of them I'm like, yeah, it's a little boring.
yeah, yeah. I know
Like
exactly what you
is
mean.
that the only shot they could do was just like they look up and then
don't
the shadow
don't
comes
get me
down.
started. Don't
I
even
like
get me started.
part 5. Oh my god, part 5. There's like literally nothing in it. It's like the craziest,
Oh
like
God,
ah! And then it's like
yeah,
it's just the hand goes, whew, and then you don't see
yeah,
anything. You're like, okay,
yeah.
or even in the first.
I'm very happy that you did mention part 5 because when that comes on my show in the future, people probably aren't going to be happy if they like it.
But it's just interesting, and so I think we talked a lot about it. And so then finally, so I went in and I had to shoot some extra kind of stills for him to use on green screen. So it's actually like me under the mask for the poster, um,
Oh,
because
okay.
the actor wasn't available, and so I gave him a bunch of different like kind of. I did one where I was like swinging my axe towards the camera, like I wanted to have like
Like a
glass
proper
shattering.
Jason one.
Totally, yeah, 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 totally. And then that one I did. It was kind of. I remember I told my friend, I'm like, oh, I gotta do this one that's almost like Bloomhouse did a remake of The Town That Dreaded Sundown, and the poster of
Yeah,
that
yeah.
guy like looking over his shoulder. And so that was the
Looking
one he used.
badass.
Yeah, which I thought was cool. But it was just a great experience. And then to go to like the look of the film, which I think for some people it's a little tricky because like at our first premiere, we premiered with a film called She Came from the Woods, and it's very modern looking and sharp, like clinically sharp. And our film was like way softer in the image, but I kind of go back to like the 80s when you're looking at a lot of those films from the 80s, they're much softer. So if you go to like Mutilator or whatever, the lenses are softer. And I think that
Yeah,
it gives it a bit more of a vintage look, which I like because I don't necessarily like, if you're going to do a throwback film, you kind of have to also embrace some of the look of the era too.
yeah,
Even to go
yeah,
to like the nighttime blues, you know, like how like in Nightmare on Elm Street, and when like Tina's walking down the hall, or the, you know, like the at the beginning in the alleyway, and it has this
yeah,
great
yeah,
blue tint to it, which I love, and I feel
yeah.
like, anyway, it's just I could go on forever
I
about
mean,
that
we're
stuff.
in this. I mean, I feel really strongly about modern day cinematography and so on, anyway, and the technical side of it, because I find sometimes when I'm watching stuff, the digital look really takes you out of it.
Yeah,
Sometimes, if you don't have somebody as a filmmaker who knows what they're doing, using digital sometimes really loses that cinematic look that,
right.
you know, is the reason that you watch these movies. The, like I said, the iconography, the aesthetic of what cinema used to be. If you don't have a filmmaker that knows how to use it, sometimes it looks so digital, it really takes me out of it
Oh
as a,
yeah,
but then that's me over criticizing, because that's what I do.
yeah,
Like you were mentioning earlier on about when you watch Alien and you're doing that wheel, I do
yeah.
that on every film I watch.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
so overly and you know, critical of stuff, because
Right.
when you look at it, you know, as a filmmaker on that perspective, I'm always looking at things where you're like, well, what works, what doesn't work, and
Yeah,
I always try and do it by every sort of aspect, whether it's the cast or the
yeah,
directing, the cinematography, the music, and stuff. So I'm always really overly critical, which I really shouldn't be, because it ruins the experience for me sometimes.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah, so it's really interesting. But one thing that I do want to talk to you. So you wrote the movie as well,
Yeah.
didn't you?
Yes, yeah.
And what I really enjoy the script in this movie.
Hmm.
And what I love is I love the meta side of it, where I love the conversation that they're having walking in the woods,
Oh,
and they talk about Friday the 13th, and
right,
then he says about, oh, you like horror movies, you see Lost Boys, and
yeah,
and then he's like, Lost Boys is horror, and then she's like, it's got Jason Patrick in it,
right.
and that, I literally laughed out loud when I heard that.
Yeah,
But there's loads of little bits in within the movie that, you know, like, makes you, it brings you in more, because
yeah,
you feel like you're part of that world more, because it's referencing things that you know in
yeah,
real life, not, you know, outside of the movie. So I
yeah.
really enjoyed that.
Well, thanks.
And I really enjoy the relationship that the characters have with each other. You get the real sort of sense and vibe of the fact that it's, you know, the summer job, so to
Yeah,
speak.
right.
Um, yeah, it just works. I genuinely really enjoy the script of it. I
Well,
thought it
thanks.
was fantastic.
Yeah,
Um,
it was interesting.
yeah,
Like, some of that stuff was so interesting because, like, I, it was my first time ever writing a feature script. It was funny because I would watch like Masterclass with Aaron Sorkin, which I thought was always hilarious. That I'm watching Aaron Sorkin doing a masterclass on screenwriting, so I can figure out how to write this slasher film. Not a genre not known for Aaron Sorkin level
yeah,
writing.
yeah,
But I wanted the characters to feel relatable, and also like characters that live in a world where there are horror movies, where there
yeah,
these
yeah,
do exist. Because I feel like the audience, I think, to like I love horror, and so I always love, like, I did go through that kind of Kevin Williamson Scream era,
yes,
but I think like I didn't want to go so meta to where you just like, oh, these characters think they're so smart and I don't really care. I just want them to be more like just people who like casually exist in that world of horror movies and Nightmare on Elm Street and stuff. And so they kind of make jokes about it, and they're and I just think of what would you really do if you were in a slasher film, and not
yeah,
like what you think you would do, but what you would actually do. When
yeah,
things go
yeah.
wrong, when
Well, that's
you
one of the things I want to talk to you about as
yeah,
well. With it as well, is that I'm trying to sort of foot around it as well without giving too much away. But one of the things I really loved about it as well is the killer in it isn't a Michael Myers or a Jason or anything like that. It is there's parts of this film, and one of my favorite, if not my favorite part of the film, once again trying not to give anything away, but you'll know what I'm talking about, is a scene where there's three of them, I believe. They're on, trying to run away. They're being pursued by the killer, and he is taking one of them down, but the other one then attacks him.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed that because once again, it adds to this sort of realism that, I think it really draws you in and creates more of a tension as you as a viewer,
Yeah.
because you've got somebody that, like you probably could defeat, but
Right.
yet he's still, going to find his way to go above and beyond to finish the
Yeah.
job. But I really enjoyed that, and I think that scene was a real standout for me. One of the part near the end of that scene, where he's got one of the characters up against the wall,
Yeah.
and that where the music sort of silences down,
Yeah.
like that scene is absolutely fantastic.
Oh, thanks.
Like from as a filmmaker side of me, because as I said, I overly overly critical of everything that I watch. The filmmaker side of me was just like, this is a person who genuinely understands the craft, because
Yeah.
that scene could have just played out how it was already doing it, but it
Yeah.
was the way that it was done created that extra sort of dread and tension
Yeah.
that I really enjoyed. It's such a fantastic scene. But yeah, that was a cool aspect of the killer within this, that it wasn't
Yeah.
somebody that felt like they were indestructible.
Right. Yeah, I didn't want to do that because I base a lot of the film on things that I had actually gone through. Not necessarily I dealt with a serial killer, but I did kind of survive someone who was a, like pretty abusive, terrifying, like, narcissistic sociopath. And so I went through a lot of PTSD from that. And so, to go to the survivor thing, I really related a lot to like the final girl characters in films. And so I wanted to make the villain of the film be kind of real and true to what I experienced.
Yeah,
And I think the scariest thing about what I went through was to realize it's like this person didn't look like a monster. They look like anybody else. And to see them sometimes, or to see them like in passing, you would never think they're capable of that kind of stuff. And so, to go back to the villain of this film, I wanted them to not be that, because I when I think of like Jason from Friday the 13th, I'm like, he's like a shark. He's like Jaws
yeah, yeah, yeah,
before. There's there's nothing like emotionally interesting about him at all. And so I wanted to have, all of these layers to things. And I know sometimes people are like, oh, there's not enough gore or something. But I was like, sometimes some of the violent moments to me, the point of them is not necessarily the moment itself, but like what follows. So like, like there was one scene in particular where one character gets killed in front of somebody else
yeah,
by a killer, and then and then they immediately turn around and they kind of gaslight the main character, like, like they're the killer kind of thing or whatever. And I kind of shot that in a wide because I wanted the audience to kind of really understand like how crazy this situation is, where it's not just it's not just the kill, it's what happens after the fact. That's where like you really start to understand this is disturbing, anyway. And I remember
yeah.
I tried to communicate a lot of this stuff to the actors in the film, and like, this is the stuff I would have gone through. These are things that would never happen. Like you would never get the end of Scream, big reveal, and then the master plan, like the new Scream. I'm like, that would never happen in
No,
reality.
no, no,
The,
no. It's not
the
real.
reality is they would continue to tell you it's your fault to the end, So that's kind of where like sometimes I think it's interesting where the audience or some of the reviews we've gotten is like, oh, there's no there's no motivation or all this other stuff. I'm like, sometimes I think it might have been because I was too close to the subject matter, but also I think that it's like, well, you kind of have to take stock of what this person really is to understand more about why they would do something or whatever. But yeah, so it was interesting to, again, to get the audience to see a certain way so they understand like, you just saw this and now this is happening, and that is, to me, was like the real point of it, was to see that thing, where they say like,
Yeah, yeah.
you're the one who's doing this or something. I could go
Yeah,
on.
well, sometimes like
Yeah.
with horror, it's it's not always the things that are happening or what you see.
Yeah.
As you say, it's the aftermath of everything
Right.
that comes because of it. You just think of, like, I always think about this with horror movies, like, we only see that moment in their lives and in that time where it happens.
Mm.
So what happens after it,
Right.
and whether it's the moment after or whether it's a month afterwards or so on.
Yeah.
So it's always interesting. But you spoke about the cast a little bit.
Yeah. Sure.
The cast in this film are absolutely fantastic as well, and
Okay.
I think that they really helped bring life to the extra elements that you have within this movie.
Yeah.
As I've already mentioned, this film isn't just a slasher movie. There's more to it, like you mentioned as well, and what you personally put into it as well, that
Yeah.
I find very interesting.
Yeah.
To talk about the cast a little bit as
Sure.
well. How did they come about?
Yeah. Most of them came from University of Illinois acting program, so they are graduates. Like they had just graduated that May, and several of them came on to work on my film, and then others were local to Champaign Theater. And I really just looked at the production of Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Night of the Living Dead and even Evil Dead as kind of case studies for how to do our film, because we weren't in a major film hub like LA, New York, Atlanta. And so I had to train all of my crew through my workshop. And then I really just started to look at the like people I knew in the theater community who I wanted to work with. And I would just think about them and write characters to them, just imagining like them saying these lines. And then, once we were there, it was great because they had all this chemistry already from going through 4 years of this acting program together.
Yeah,
And it's interesting to think about chemistry because you have to not only think about the chemistry of the ensemble, but then also the chemistry between your like final girl and the villain. And then, for this one particular villain character, I was doing this. I did this local like 30-second teaser for a theater performance, and this character had one line in the 30 seconds, and they were so intimidating. I was like, I need to cast that person in this film. That like I need to work with them because they're gonna just own it. Like you need to have
yeah,
someone who's so intimidating, that it's not just like,
yeah,
and I feel like that goes again to like the like size, like in all these slasher movies, size is the intimidating factor. But in the reality of dealing with something like that or someone like that, it's like their personality. It's
yeah.
the
It's the mind, isn't it? It's the madness. Yeah, that's
yeah,
that's
yeah,
that's the scary thought of it. Is
yeah. Oh yeah,
you know
because like
what they're
oh yeah,
doing. Yeah,
because they build into your head like they're like this Godzilla sized monster when really they're just a 5'7" person.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
In
That's it.
therapy.
And
Yeah.
in the cast, the person that played the killer, were they the one in the costume as well, or was
Uh,
that just a bit of each? Because what I loved as well, I was watching him a lot
mm.
throughout the movie, and there was some proper Terminator moves in there
Oh
as
yeah,
well.
totally. Yeah,
And
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know if that was like a conscious decision or anything, but like there was, the proper like where the body would turn and then the head, or
Yeah, yeah,
and some of the actions that they would do and the movements, I was just like, it feels, and I loved it. I loved that as well because it once again it sort of you knew that you were watching one of these, like a horror movie, when they
yeah,
do that. Like it felt very grounded, felt really real, but then there was also that extra element to the killer when he was
right,
doing this sort of movement where you're like, it could be more, you know what I mean, like the Michael
right,
Myers sort of thing. Like,
yeah,
why is he doing it? What is he, who is he? What could he be?
right.
And that's
Well,
what I really enjoyed about the killer in this. Like,
yeah,
you're like, yeah, it's just a normal person, but then the odd moment where he's like the Terminator and you're like, hang on.
right. Well, I think the thing to that, and I talked about this with, so I was really interested in, I saw Friday the 13th Part 3, and I was struck by the actor, I think it's like Richard Brooker, who played Jason in that film. There's a scene in the barn when he like can't find Chris Higgins and he kind of loses it. And it
Yeah,
was one time that I really felt like, wow, there's a physicality there that I haven't seen in any other films at all. And I was struck by that. And then I was watching My Bloody Valentine, and Peter Cowper, who plays under the mask, and Neil Affleck is the reveal. Like he had a dance background. And I was thinking like, well, that's really interesting to think about because you're dealing with someone under a mask. So how do you just make it more than just a lumbering idiot
yeah, yeah,
walking through the course? And so I reached out to Luzzo, who they played Under the Mask, and Lezo was also in the acting program, and they had a dance background. And so we talked a lot at length about what I wanted this character to feel like, because you're dealing with someone who is a malignant narcissist. And so what are they doing once they put on the mask? Is they feel powerful, they
Yeah,
feel
who they become.
like kind of sensual. So I wanted them to move like a predator, like and not just, but like to get off on it, like they're getting off on the moves and the sleekness and like the intention there and everything too. And so it's like,
Well, as we know, with so many of these sort of killers, serial killers, that when they put a mask on, that is
yeah,
their true face. So,
right, yeah.
but that really comes out in the movie as well.
Yeah, and so it was interesting to go to that, to think about, because it's like I wanted them to be like, there's always someone there under the mask thinking, so even like and then just to, like that fight sequence was great too, because the other great thing about having a mask is that Lezo could literally give the counts for the and 1, 2, 3,
Oh, okay,
4,
yeah,
5, 6, 7, like that,
yeah.
and you could never see that they were actually talking the entire time.
Yeah.
But no, they did an amazing job. I think I've forgotten so much. Like, it's funny, I edited it for like 14 months, and I would always forget that like they're under the mask, because it just, I think that they did such a great job as
Yeah.
the killer, So I just keep forgetting that that's Lezo.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it was a really, the killer itself within the movie, as you can see, obviously from the poster, looks fantastic. I love the look of the killer within the movie. From just the way that he walks, from what he does, the movements, like I said, and how it makes me feel like the Terminator and stuff, and it sort of then does make me feel of like the classic
Right.
slasher villains and so on.
Yeah.
The mask itself looks great, the coat looks great, like it as a whole costume. It was so cool because it felt very reminiscent, very nostalgic, but like I said earlier, without shoving it in your face. You feel like this is a creation of part of the movie, and so it works really, really well.
Thanks. Yeah. The coat came from, it was my army jacket. When I was in the army, I just took it and I just razored it and kind of just slashed,
and it worked.
But
it worked. One of the things as well I want to talk about is the look of the movie, and this is quite a big point for me about the movie as well. I mean, straight off the bat, one thing I do want to say is that this is one of the best looking movies I've seen for a long, long time. And that's something that anybody that knows me knows that's sort of, not that I am anyone, and I mean nothing, and my opinion means nothing, but it's one of those things that, cinematography and the aesthetic, the look of movies is a huge deal for me. I've always been really interested in looks of things and aesthetics of things. And that's why people like Carpenter and Spielberg are such inspirations to me as a filmmaker, because I love their use of wide angle lenses and wide angle shots, and how they're not afraid to show you everything.
Right.
Because that to me is actually scarier. Because for example, rather than having close-ups of this and close-ups of that, like within your movie, if you've got 3 people in the screen and one of them's the killer, he takes one of them down, and then you're already wondering what's going to happen with the next person. And by showing it all, it creates that tension, creates that dread, and you do that so well in this movie. It's ridiculous. I could literally, I could spend 4 hours talking about it. My partner is probably fed up with me, because every time I've watched this film 3 times now, and I constantly am talking about how beautiful the movie is.
Oh, thank you.
If you are somebody that who loves the look and the aesthetic of movies, this is one of those films that you have to see, because honestly, it blew my mind.
Well, thank you. That's very kind. Like, it means a lot to me, because it was tough. We were really, it was a very tough shoot. It was a very difficult shoot. And I had an amazing crew that really kind of went, to the mat for the film. We had these equity investors early on that, were going to throw all this money in. And then 4 days before we were going to shoot, they sent me all this legal paperwork, and they were basically just stealing the film directly.
Screw you, yeah.
And so we just kind of made we had an emergency meeting that night, and like, let's just, give me like 13 days, and I'll make sure to be paying you guys off as we wrap and as we finish and as movie continues. And so they all agreed to go, and I wouldn't be here without any of their help. And a lot of them, I was like a total stress ball. Probably not the nicest person to ever work with, but like, they did such an amazing job, and I love cinematography too. And so that was kind of the big thing for me. Was I wanted the camp to feel like a character in the film. I wanted the forest to feel like a character in the film, to be immersive, to be, you are alone and no one is coming to help you, kind of a thing. And so we needed to show that world. And I think over time, I was looking at, like, I love how you mentioned Spielberg, like 21 millimeters is his kind of go-to focal length. And even Dean Cundey with like a Halloween, it's like you need that whole world, because you need some of that information, like Michael Myers popping up in the background when she's sitting
Yeah,
there. And you're
and
like,
just
oh,
just some of the shots as well of where sometimes nothing even really happens,
right,
and
yeah,
it's just the fact that you're seeing everything, especially like Halloween, for example. For me, it's Halloween on the outside. If you look into it, it can be such a basic movie,
right,
but it's one. But somehow a basic movie was created to be one of the most incredible movies
oh
that's ever been made.
yeah,
And for me, like it's still one of those films that aesthetically and cinematography wise, like Dean Cundey is such an icon in regards to that.
yeah,
And you look back on those films and you're like, because obviously it was one of the first films to use like a steady cam, I believe, or
right,
a fly cam, whatever they called it. And it works to the benefit of that movie, and you get those amazing shots of where
yeah,
Laurie's absolutely terrified running across the road and Michael Myers is behind her, but you can see him and you're
right,
like, what's going on? And then you get to like, Halloween 2018, so on, and everything's like a close up. And
right,
you're like, well, where's everything? Like, you know what I mean? Like, where's the tension? Where's the dread?
right,
Where's the,
yeah,
I can see what's going to happen, but you don't want it to happen.
right,
And I miss that a lot,
yeah,
and that's why I love going back to some of the old school films, especially the 70s and the
uh,
80s. And that's what I love about this film, is
yeah,
that it doesn't hide anything.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah,
And that was amazing.
yeah. No, we so yeah, I shot it on Atlas anamorphic lenses, 40, 65, and the 100. And I think for the most part, we shot mainly on the 40, which is like a 20 millimeter spherical equivalent. And yeah, it's like there's something about like the isolation of, like, when you have a big frame and you have two characters
Yeah,
like in the background, like when Lexi is walking through the forest and she sees like like there's like some fire going or whatever. I wanted it to feel like she's alone. And so it was interesting. We kind of, again, we didn't have like condors, so we had to kind of very indie DIY things. So instead of like big, overhead soft boxes, we would take like 8x frames, and I came up with like a system for lighting. So we'd always like front light our deep background, and then like our mid ground, we'd have lights off the side just spilling onto the ground. And then for our foreground, we'd have like a big 8x kind of off to the side, like with lighting diffused from that. And so that's kind of how we tried to go. And then, a lot of some of these locations, like there was like nothing out there. So we had to carry all of our gear, all our C stands, our generator, all that stuff through the forest by hand.
yeah. That's
So
it.
like,
Proper indie
oh
filmmaking
yeah, because I've been on some.
101.
Oh yeah, I've been on sets where like the director's like sitting there at the monitor, sipping on their coffee, and I'm like lugging C stands. I'm operating,
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
like
But once again, like what I love is that you're essentially preparing yourself and everyone else around you for what might come next.
yeah, yeah.
Um, you go through, the hard stuff to get through the better stuff, and then you're more experienced, and you're like, yeah, it's right. I've got this.
I hope so.
Yeah, hopefully. But it was, but yeah, I just that for me, and like you're saying with the lighting, the
Yeah,
look of the movie, the anamorphic look, which is for me personally my favorite look of any movies.
oh yeah,
When
yeah,
I'm one of those people straight away. I'm like, they're using the anamorphic, and you know, oh,
Sure.
I literally, I mean, I took my daughter to go and see Jaws
Oh
the
wow.
other day on a pier, because Jaws is her favorite film ever,
Oh wow.
and we went and watched it on the end of a pier on this big screen. And I've seen the film a million times, but even though I've seen it a million times, I sit there like with my jaw dropped, because
Right.
I just love everything about that movie, because I love the movie itself, but I just love how it looked and how
Oh yeah.
Spielberg sets up the shots, and
Oh
how, like, some points Richard Dreyfuss, you can only hear his voice, but then he
right.
comes in on a boat on the outside,
No,
you know, and you're
I know
like,
exactly
how
what
do you
you're talking
even?
about. Yeah, he's like, sometimes I
Yeah,
just don't have to get, like when he's talking to those guys about like getting
yeah,
beat up for the thing, and then he
yeah,
goes, yeah,
and
Spielberg is
but
such a master of
it's just, and I love it, because like, you're like, how do you think like that? Like, as a filmmaker, like, how do you do that? And it's, the rule of third and everything like that. And he uses that so much in the movies and
yeah,
stuff. And then, so then, as like, a person that wants to become a filmmaker, you start trying to take all this in,
right,
and like, when do I want to do this, and how do I do this? And
right,
I feel like, for me personally, this is a type of film that I would look at and take things from it, because of
right.
how good I think it looks.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think it's, I looked at a lot of other films too to kind of see how to do ours. So like, knowing that we're in the forest, so like looking at a lot of films with night forest exterior lighting, and then just, it was tough, but and it was my first time shooting anamorphic as well. I normally shot spherical, so that was a slight adjustment. And then I think the interesting thing is, most of us will probably never see something we make on a big screen theater. And so like it was incredible for us to be able to go to like film festivals, and we played a drive-in, we played on other like big theater screens. And so it was interesting to see. And one of the big lessons I kind of took away from it was like, learn to back off of your actors a bit more, and go use more of your mediums and your wides. And then for the close-ups, like this on a 20-foot
Mm.
screen is crazy,
Yeah,
this
yeah, yeah.
too bad. So I think I've
Yes.
kind of, I've even through the process of going to festivals with the film, I've learned a lot more about what I want to do next time in terms of just the focus. And it's crazy. There's an interesting team that has kind of come up, and people have come to my life since this film. So it's just interesting to see. So if you're lucky enough to do a part two, like, I'll be really interested to take a lot of the mistakes I made, and hopefully learn from them and make new mistakes, the next one.
Yeah, well, that's it. Well, the life of a filmmaker, and as an actor, and anybody within these sort of, arts, and anything that you do, it's just learning, isn't it? And you
Oh yeah.
take from it, and everything you do, you learn from it. Like I mentioned, the only thing I've done so far was the short film that I made, and every time I watch it, I'm like, why did I do that? And
That
what a
never goes
thing. But
away.
then also, yeah, but then you also have to reflect on it, because it's no budget filmmaking. I had no money,
Right.
and I took out a loan just to buy, I think it was like a Canon 7D, and I
Mm,
brought a cheap lens that I could, and you didn't have filming permission to film anything, and so I had to do everything like at night, or getting chased around, being like, you can't film here and stuff. So you sort
right.
of then go, well, on reflection, I did what I could. But
Right.
it's all learning, isn't it? It's
Oh,
all, it's all a
100%.
process of learning, and
Yeah.
enjoying it.
I
And
went to
but you
Oh, sorry. I
go
know, I
on.
was going to say, like,
Sorry.
I went to this horror con a couple weeks back, Days of the Dead in Indianapolis, and a lot of the cast of the Night of the Living Dead were there. Like, and I got to meet
Cool.
Judith Odia, which was amazing. But one of the things she said was, they made the best film they could with the resources that they had, and
Yeah.
I think that's totally to the point of everything. Because I mean, sorry, because we lost 50 grand that I had to turn down like 4 days before we started. We were living at the camp. I had a mutiny in the middle of the shoot.
Oh no.
It was insane. Like, one of the guys like fired off this email to the entire cast and crew, telling them like to walk and all this stuff. No one did.
No way.
It was just insane. And it's just, I think some. I always feel like a completed film is a miracle, and I feel like, one of my friends was telling me, she's like, I've seen a lot of indie films come and go, and like the stuff that's happening with your guys' film, I don't know what it is, but it's kind of impressive. And And
Yeah.
I know our film is not perfect either because I've seen it a million times, and at this point, I'm just like we're playing in town this Thursday at this beautiful place called the Virginia Theater, and I'm just thinking like, oh, I'm going to go see every mistake on this massive screen with like a couple
And you've
hundred.
seen it how many
Oh,
times?
thousands. I don't need to watch it anymore. I'm just going to go outside. But I do get a kick out of it because there's a statue of Roger Ebert outside of the theater because he's also from this town. I live a couple blocks from his boyhood home, and there's so many like I don't know if you saw the In Search
Oh
of
yeah, that's it.
doc the new one where he's just ragging on all of
Yeah.
these, and so I find it a deep amount of satisfaction to have our slasher film play in his theater. I mean, he was a good guy. I remember running into him
Yeah.
a couple times, but yeah, it's just I don't know. I love this. I always loved this stuff though. So yeah, but I think the '80s
Yeah.
was a weird time for slasher films.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, ultimately, I mean, like you said earlier, everyone that was involved in this, including yourself, including the cast, everybody, sometimes things are difficult, sometimes things work all right, but
Yeah,
ultimately, you created a movie, which is amazing.
yeah,
You did it, you crossed the finish line. And then when they come out the way that this one has, and then you get someone, some little English boy like me who sits there, enjoys it, and uses that and genuinely feels that that could really influence me as a filmmaker.
yeah.
That to me is like a job well done.
Thank you.
to
I mean,
me.
I
So
feel. I think the thing I love about the horror community, and then talking with you and everybody else, is that I think we all just love the same thing. And I don't. It's interesting because you were going back to like working with other, like big celebrities or whatever, and I worked with the pumpkins and stuff, and that was a high stress environment. But I just think we all. If, I feel like the only way to do it is to really think about how like we're all in this together, that we're all creating things together that we can all appreciate and share with each other. And I met so many other cool horror filmmakers and genre filmmakers through the conventions, and it's great to see like there are waves that are happening. So it's like I can see other people coming up now, and I can see like there's a wave
yeah,
coming in a couple of years or whatever. And I think it's the best way for us to kind of deal with like predatory distribution and predatory distributors, and how a lot of it is just kind of stacked against indie filmmakers, is just to find like our own community in a way, and just to never forget that we all love the same thing. Because when I'm at these conventions, I'll probably talk everybody's ear off if they walk by our table. I'll be talking
yeah,
some
you
ear
and
off
me both.
about like an Intruder or something like that, or like
Yeah.
Sam Raimi. I mean, I think
Oh yeah.
I cornered these guys for like probably like an hour and a half, just
Yeah,
talking about
yeah,
horror
exactly.
movies.
I'm exactly the same. If somebody, as soon as I get a whiff of anyone talking about a horror movie, I'm straight in there.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah,
go quite often to my local like place where I can pick up Blu-rays and stuff like that, and they've got a whole section of like Arrow video and
oh
stuff
yeah,
like that.
yeah.
And if I see anybody there, I'm like watching what they're picking up
Right.
and so on. And I'm that person that's just like, like I literally had a conversation this morning with somebody about Maniac Cop for about 40
Oh,
minutes, and my daughter's just like, oh, well, we're going to go and get some food while you're doing this. But that's the thing. Like, you're right. This community, the people, we're so supportive. We love this thing because, like it feels like, even though it's so massive, it still feels like this sort of punk rock. It still feels very outsider. I mean, the amount of times I've got messages calling me the devil and I'm going to hell because I do a horror podcast and stuff
oh
like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
So but so even though, and it is mainstream, and that's the thing, but you still feel this connection with everybody, like it is like a family, and
oh, yeah,
how we love to have these conversations with people. So I'm very
yeah.
grateful that I get to do this. Very grateful that I get to have this conversation with you. It's
Oh yeah.
amazing.
Oh yeah. Well, thank you. I mean,
Um,
it's great. Yeah. And sorry.
yeah. Well, so that's all my questions about Final Summer.
Sure.
But what I want to do is I've got a few quick fire questions,
Sure.
which if I do this again with anyone will probably be like a common thing. But if I never do it again, then you'll be the only one. So,
Okay.
so what I've got is so number one, I've got fave horror movie, or if
Mm.
that's too difficult, slasher.
Okay. Um, It's either Halloween. Oh no, I would say Black Christmas, the original Bob Clark.
Okay,
Black Christmas, probably my favorite. So
one of the first,
yeah,
and yeah, I mean it is a classic, and everybody stay tuned because you know I'm not going to say too much, but maybe Christmas time for the podcast. That may be, or may not be the film that we're doing. It is, but
nice.
but it may be. What's the next one? Favorite director?
Man, it's
I'm
tough.
putting you on the spot.
Probably, I mean, probably Spielberg, but I do love David Fincher a lot.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah.
My three, I'm similar. My three is literally in regards to like the inspiration it gives me in the movies. Fincher, Spielberg, and Carpenter
Oh,
are the
of
ones
course.
for me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it's funny as well because I love how they're so completely different. You know, you put someone like Fincher to Spielberg, they're
Oh yeah,
completely different.
yeah.
But then you can take so much of it. Like Seven to me is like one of the
Mm.
most perfect films ever made.
Oh yeah, completely.
But it's still the shots in it are so good that it still holds up today. That looks like something that could have been shot like 2 weeks
Oh,
ago.
it's
It's
incredible.
insane.
Yeah, yeah, so good.
Um, it's probably a stupid question, but fave decade for horror?
80s.
It's got to be the 80s, right? Yeah, it's
Yeah.
got to be the 80s. Number four, if you could cast anyone in your next movie, who would it be?
Actually, I think Judith O'Dea would be pretty awesome. I actually talked to her about like if we did a sequel, because I have a plan for the sequel that I think would be really interesting, and it does go into that kind of Seven territory a little bit more.
Okay.
But that's a tough one. I think I'd go with her just because I love her. Just just a sense of history, like
Yeah.
in the genre. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It's like a double whammy. Like you know it's going to work for the film, but then you also as a fan, you get to
yeah.
work with someone like that. Would be
Oh,
amazing.
she's so regal, I think too, and just
Yeah.
she has a
Yeah.
great air about her, which is really wonderful. So yeah.
And then one of the questions that I always have, and it's also well, it's a segment within the podcast, is where I ask horror fans or listeners of the show to send me in or talk about their first horror movie memories that they
Mhm.
remember. So, can you remember yours?
Yeah. Actually, I saw Poltergeist at my friend's house. My friend Josh, he lived across the street from me. I think I was in second or third grade, and that scared the daylights out of me. I remember I think I watched it from behind the couch most of the movie, and then I came out for when the clown scene happened, and I had
Yeah.
this Bosa the Clown doll at home, and I think I was ruined for life after that movie.
That's it. It's
Yeah,
so weird, isn't it? Because it's like these are the films that start us on this journey.
yeah,
And Poltergeist, I always think is like one of those films that is underappreciated for how actually terrifying it can be.
yeah,
Because it's like I remember watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Poltergeist around the same sort of time,
yeah.
and it was Poltergeist that actually got me more than Texas
Oh,
Chainsaw
totally.
Massacre.
Yeah, yeah,
Because I think obviously it's a sort of a completely sort of different film, and obviously both Toby Hooper, um, but it's just and the contrast and difference between both of those movies is insane.
right.
But I mean, but having Poltergeist as sort of a first horror memory is a pretty cool. That's a good one.
Oh, yeah. What about you?
So my first horror movie memory is Alien.
Nice.
That got me on my journey because that was the film that was just like it. Not only did I enjoy it as a film and as a horror, but then also it was just like it started making me ask all the questions as to how and why. And then after I watched Evil Dead, um, which was my second first sort of horror film, and at this point I was about 7 or 8 years old.
Yeah.
Because by the time I was 10 years old, I was stealing Fangoria magazines. So
Mm.
I was already like a hardened, obsessed horror fan
Right.
by the time I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
10.
yeah.
But yeah, so when I watched those two films, that was one of the because I mean, Evil Dead, it still
Mm.
blows my mind to the fact that how they managed to make some of the most amazing shots I've ever seen
Yeah.
in my life, and create the film that they did and create the iconography of what is created so much in
Oh,
horror.
yeah,
And
yeah.
yet we're still in 2023 and we've got a new Evil Dead movie.
I know, I
It's
know.
insane. It's insane. So
It's so
yeah,
crazy.
it's
Yeah.
amazing.
No, it's just
Um,
I just think like
yeah,
for horror, I mean, I was gonna say something about it, but I think the thing that makes horror so lasting, it's again, it goes back to like the feelings that they give you and the emotional feeling. And it's funny, it's like to see horror as having this renaissance right now, and even
Yeah.
more so, like I'm so sick of, I can't see another Marvel movie. I'm gonna lose my mind. But
No.
like, I
No. No.
just
No.
I think there's something to it. I talked with Laura Marie Taylor, who played Vicky in Friday 13 Part 2 recently at this horror con. I was doing a podcast with her, but I asked her, like, what is it about these films, like, like, a lot of like women come up to you and talk to you, and she's like, what do they say? Why do they like these movies? And she kind of went back to like, well, they really appreciate the survivor part because that's what they identify with. And so I think it's interesting. It's like the one genre where we can kind of see our, just, I don't know, all these situations play out that we can relate
Yeah.
to, and also be glad we're not in that role.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Not
think it's
yeah,
it's like out of every genre, it's the human, it's the emotions as we go through as a human when we're watching
yeah.
it, but also we're there with the characters as well.
Oh yeah.
Because you take someone like Ripley, for example,
Hmm,
in
totally.
Alien, and the shit that she goes through in that film is unbelievable. And you're there on that journey, and it's how that is then making you feel as a person.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah,
think that's why horror has been
yeah,
so important and has continued sort of, its
yeah,
success for so long.
yeah. I'll just say this
That
last
it,
thing
it
is,
yeah,
and to that point, I think it's like, because I talked with another person that I met at Horror Hound in Cincinnati, and she really responded to like what the final girl in our film went through, because she had kind of gone through similar things, and we really started to talk and bond and about our own like kind of situations and how we escaped it. And I think it's like, what I always like to say is like, and this is how I felt getting out of my kind of nightmare situation, was like, I'm still standing at the end. Like, you threw everything you could at me and you didn't get the
yeah,
best of me. And like, I'm still here. And so I think that's, to me, is what I like to put into the film. It's not, I know like not everybody's going to love it, and that's totally fine. And plenty of people are going to hate it, and that's totally cool too, because they want that like Terrifier 2 thing or whatever. And I'm like,
yeah,
this
yeah,
is just not that film. But I think
yeah,
the people who have been through hell, who can relate to this kind of thing, I think that to me is like the audience I want to talk to, because I think it's when you're in that place and you're coming out of it, you have like no self-esteem, you have no confidence, you're a shell of yourself, and you want to have someone be like, you're strong, and you can do this. It's like, you look and you probably feel like crap, but you have no idea how strong you actually are. And so I think that's one thing I'd like to say, just the people who relate to this film. It's just through that character. It's like saying it through Lexi or whatever, or whoever the final girl is. I don't. Maybe
yeah.
somebody else. I don't know. That's kind of it for me, And I think that's why it was interesting, because film is so hard. I've been through boot camp. I taught middle school. This is the hardest thing I've ever done, and I think, to go to your point about like making films, it's like, I feel like it has to be personal, because making it personal is going to get you through making the film, because that's miracle number one. Then distribution, hopefully not getting screwed. But then I think the greatest miracle is when people watch it and then they share it with other
Yeah.
people. Or like talk to you is like the third miracle. So
Yeah, I mean, I've been so excited about doing this,
yeah.
and it's one of those things where I try and see it on the other side sometimes, where it must be amazing, not necessarily me, because I don't mean anything, but what's
Yeah,
amazing is as a filmmaker, showing these films, sharing these films on for people to enjoy, to love, to want to have these conversations with you. That's one of those things where you're like, okay, that's why I do it, and that's it, and
yeah.
it's amazing. But I think, as I said, with Final Summer, hopefully I haven't given too much away.
No, no.
But it is a film that I genuinely really, really enjoy. Everybody knows my honesty, and I wouldn't be doing this if I genuinely didn't enjoy the movie. I take so much of away from it on a cinematic and cinematography and technical standpoint. It's phenomenal. So for people out there, if you love cinematography, you're going to love this film. If you love good performances, you're going to love this film. If you love throwback slashers that are not in your face and tell you you're supposed to remember this film, it doesn't do that, and that's to the advantage of the movie. It's
Nice.
got a great script, fantastic music as well, and it also brings something different to the table, rather, like you're saying, rather than just being a normal slasher that, yeah, a lot of people at the moment, they may feel like that they want, like you mentioned with Terrifier 2, with the ultra slashers we're getting now. Even Scream 6 went a lot harder with the violence and more graphicness. You know, there's a lot of that all about now, but we've still got to remember that there's got to be a story driving it, and you know, an emotional input and output that you've got to have with these movies, and Final Summer gives you that. So hopefully people will do it. But I want to know, I do want to know if you know yourself, what's next. I want to know what's next coming from you.
Oh yeah, well, so Final Summer, it hits streaming September 12th, and so that'll be out there. I've got
And
part.
is that going everywhere, or is it just
It's going
like,
to like
do we know?
Amazon, iTunes,
Awesome.
Vudu, and then I think our main distributors out of the UK, actually, I think they're Trinity Creative, and so they're helping get us out there. Yeah,
Awesome.
I've got a couple of projects that I'm kind of like, you know, here and there. Like one's more of like an indie drama about a family-owned drive-in that's like kind of on the last night of its screening, kind of a thing, but of its, you know, existence. And then otherwise, I've got a couple other horror ones right now. One is like kind of almost like a home invasion meets
Okay.
vampires.
Oh yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you took like Shaun of the Dead and the Lost Boys and you threw it in one house, kind of thing. It's kind of a hilarious. And I'm a friend of mine, this guy Nathan Dalton. I've been talking with him about, like, you know, as a co-writer, for him to come on, because I love he's trying to get me to shoot this this haunted house of pancakes movie, which is, it sounds insane. It sounds completely insane. And then I read the script. And I'm like, this is the funniest thing I've ever read. It's kind of like if you took Critters and Gremlins and Killer Clowns from Outer Space and you rolled them up into a movie. It's like you have
Nice.
this kind of thing. And it just seems like so much fun, and a chance for me to not direct, but just to focus on cinematography. But yeah, I think yeah, there's a couple of like just a couple of things that are kind of moving forward. I'm finishing up a horror anthology. I've got one segment in there. It's like about a bunch of YouTubers that go to this like abandoned Air Force base and may or may not get abducted by aliens.
Oh, okay.
So
Well, that's cool.
we kind of shot that already, because yeah, there is actually an abandoned Air Force base like 20 minutes from my house. So we
Oh,
do a lot,
really?
yeah, we do a lot of filming out there. And actually, I was going to set Final Summer 2 out there, because the film would leave the camp and go into town, because basically I kind of wrote Final Summer as a trilogy. So the first one really has to do with the camp itself, and then the main theme is fight or flight. And the second one is kind of getting outside of the camp. So there's a bit of a time jump. And then kind of the theme of the second one is that the truth is deadly, because that was like when I was escaping this person, like I and her gas and their gaslighting or whatever. It's like I could start to understand like what was real, and how like knowing what was actually real was made it worse in a way, you know, like
Yeah.
so they became more crazy and more abusive and stuff, as I was trying to show people what the truth was. And so I think
Yeah.
that'd be interesting to take the stakes of the first one and make it much more severe, you know. So, you know, kind of thing. But
Well,
yeah,
all I can do is hope. I hope that we get to see a Final Summer 2.
yeah,
And then hopefully the third one as well. That would
yeah,
be, you know, amazing. You know, we all love, you know, the
yeah.
trilogies,
Well, I'll
and
tell you
I've
this.
got
Oh yeah, I'll tell you
gone.
this. It's like it's interesting to see Halloween Ends come out during the time that we were making this, because I was watching and listening to a lot of people's comments about like what they found wrong with the film, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm taking a lot of notes as I'm going through. So I would say that like if we do part two, there are people in the first one that we still need are learning more about. So
Yes.
that's all I'll
Yeah.
say about that. But it won't
Well,
be anything where it's like,
the,
who's this guy? Where'd they come from? Kind of a thing. So
yeah. Well, I think what's good about Final Summer is that it isn't, like I've mentioned as well, it isn't a straightforward slasher. So you are now, because of the film and what it is and what it deals with, and the characters are going through the film on their own journey, especially obviously the final girl, you know, the main lead of the film, that it does help open it up, or help people understand more that the other film, Final Summer 2, 3, could be more different,
oh yeah,
because it's not just the standard hack and slash
right,
movie. There's more to it. There's more emotion. There's more idea behind what it all is and what it is meaning on an emotional level as well as it on a film. So I can't wait. I can't wait to see what you do next. Obviously, I'm already a fan after Final Summer because you know, the filmmaker in me was in absolute awe of what I was seeing, and it was a really good film. I genuinely do really enjoy it, and I can't wait for everybody else to get a chance to see it. It's going to be amazing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you.
No, thank you so much for having this. As I said, you're the first interview I've ever done, and hopefully everybody enjoys it, and hopefully I haven't messed it up too much.
Yeah, you've been good.
Awesome. Well, thank you, John, so much for coming on the Let's Talk Horror channel, and everybody, you heard it. Get ready. Final Summer's coming soon to streaming, and you know, get ready to watch it. Get ready to watch it because it's great. Thanks, John.
Thank you.